In a small rural town, where kindness still outweighs circumstance, a struggling single father's life is about to change forever. While driving his beat-up pickup truck along a dusty back road, he discovers a young girl in a wheelchair, critically wounded from a snake bite. Without thinking twice, he lifts her into his truck and races against time through winding country roads to reach the nearest clinic, staying by her side and fighting to keep her conscious through each passing minute. What he doesn't know is that within hours, a private jet will touch down, carrying a reclusive billionaire mother who's been desperately searching for her missing daughter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Wheeler's alarm never had the chance to ring at 5 a.m. His internal clock, honed by 15 years of farm work and the last 12 years of fatherhood, always woke him a few minutes before. He lay still in the darkness, listening to the familiar creaks of his century-old farmhouse, waiting to hear the soft call that would surely come. "Dad?" Sarah's voice drifted down the hallway right on schedule. His feet found the worn floorboards, and he pulled on yesterday's jeans. The morning routine was as natural as breathing. Help Sarah with her morning exercises, prepare her medication, make breakfast, and try not to think about the growing stack of medical bills in his desk drawer. The physical therapist had warned him that Sarah's cerebral palsy would require regular professional care, but rural Tennessee wasn't exactly overflowing with specialists. Besides, the insurance only covered so much, and the farm barely broke even these days. So Jack had learned everything he could: stretches, exercises, pressure points, becoming not just father but therapist, nurse, and constant companion to his 12-year-old daughter. "Ready for our morning workout, kiddo?" Jack called softly. Entering Sarah's room, the walls were covered with her artwork, bright, hopeful paintings that belied the daily challenges she faced. Sarah was already awake, her brown eyes bright despite the early hour, her smile never failing to remind him of her mother. "Can we do the story again?" Sarah asked as Jack helped her through her first stretches. She knew the tale by heart, but it was their morning ritual. "Well," Jack began, supporting her leg as they worked through the range of motion exercises. "Once upon a time, there was a beautiful artist named Margaret who could paint the sunrise so real you'd swear the colors were dripping right off the canvas. It was their love story, his and Margaret's, sanitized for young ears and turned into a fairy tale. He left out the parts about the cancer that took her when Sarah was just 3, about the nights he spent terrified he couldn't raise their special needs daughter alone, about the farm slowly slipping away despite his best efforts. Instead, he told Sarah about her mother's laugh, about how she could find beauty in anything, about how she'd known from the moment of Sarah's diagnosis that their daughter would be extraordinary. And she was, smart as a whip, with a spirit that refused to be dampened by physical limitations. The morning light was streaming through the windows by the time they finished the exercises. Jack lifted Sarah into her wheelchair. She was getting too big for this. He'd need to figure out a better transfer system soon, and wheeled her to the kitchen. The coffee pot burbled welcomingly, its timer set the night before, one small luxury he allowed himself. "Pancakes?" he asked, already knowing the answer. It was Thursday, and Thursdays were pancake days, just as Mondays were oatmeal and Fridays were eggs. Structure helped Sarah feel secure, and truth be told, it helped him too. As he mixed the batter, Jack glanced at the calendar on the wall. Red circles marked upcoming doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions they couldn't really afford, and the deadline for next quarter's property taxes. He'd have to take on some extra welding jobs, maybe see if old Tom Henderson needed help with his harvest again. But for now, there were pancakes to flip, medications to sort, and a morning routine to complete. Sarah chatted about the online art class she was taking, one of the few extracurriculars they could manage with homeschooling, while Jack packed her lunch and his own. Simple sandwiches, some fruit that was just this side of too ripe, nothing fancy but enough to get them through the day. "Dad?" Sarah's voice took on that tone he knew too well, the one that meant she was about to ask something that would break his heart. "Do you think maybe this year I could try real school, just for a little while?" Jack focused on wrapping their sandwiches, buying time. The local school wasn't equipped for Sarah's needs, and the nearest specialized program was an hour away in Nashville. Even if they could afford it, how would he manage the commute and still keep the farm running? "We'll see, sweetheart," he said finally, the words tasting bitter. It was the answer of fathers everywhere who didn't want to say no, and they both knew it. "Let's focus on finishing up your current online semester first, okay?" Sarah nodded, accepting the deflection with a grace that made his chest ache. She was too young to be so understanding of limitations, too wise to her father's struggles. But that was their reality, measured out in careful compromises and silent sacrifices. In dreams deferred and needs prioritized, Sarah liked to pretend her wheelchair was a spaceship. Sometimes, when her dad was busy with farm work and she was alone in her room, she'd close her eyes and imagine soaring past the cotton fields, beyond the rusty windmill, up into endless, blue Tennessee skies. Her art teacher, the one from the online class, said she had a vivid imagination. Sarah figured she'd had plenty of time to develop it. Her latest drawing sat propped on the makeshift easel her father had welded together from spare farm equipment. It showed a girl standing in a field of wildflowers, her arms stretched wide. Sarah had spent hours getting the legs just right, strong and straight, the way she imagined hers might be someday. Her father never said anything about these drawings, but she'd catch him sometimes, looking at them with that quiet sadness he thought she didn't notice. The laptop on her desk pinged with a new message. Probably Maya, her only real friend, who she'd met in an online support group for kids with disabilities. Maya lived in California and had a different kind of cerebral palsy, the kind that affected her speech more than her movement. They'd never met in person, but they shared everything through texts and video calls. "You won't believe what happened at PT today," Maya's message read. Sarah smiled, settling in for their daily chat. Maya's family had the resources for intensive physical therapy 3 times a week. She tried not to be envious when Maya described her progress, the new techniques, the specialized equipment. Instead, she focused on celebrating her friends' victories and sharing her own small triumphs, like how she'd managed to help her dad sort seeds for spring planting yesterday, or how she was getting faster at transferring herself from bed to chair. Through her window, Sarah could see her father in the distance, his figure bent over the old tractor. He'd been trying to fix it for weeks now, determined to avoid the cost of professional repairs. She wished, not for the first time, that she could help more. Her occupational therapist, during the brief period they could afford one, had taught her exercises to improve her fine motor skills, and she practiced them religiously, hoping that someday she could be more than just a responsibility. Her journal lay open beside her, pages filled with both artwork and words. Today's entry read, "Day 4th 380 of Operation Make Dad Smile More." She'd started counting days after finding her mum's old diary in the attic, filled with numbered entries, that stopped abruptly 9 years ago. Sarah didn't remember much about her mother, but she had inherited her habit of documenting life, of finding meaning in the marking of days. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her room, highlighting the wall of achievements she'd created. Merit certificates from online courses, ribbons from the county fair's virtual art competition, printouts of encouraging comments from her teachers. Small victories, her dad called them. But Sarah knew better. Each one represented hours of effort, of adapting, of finding ways to participate in a world that wasn't built for wheels. A loud clang from outside drew her attention back to the window. Her father had dropped something, and even from this distance, she could read frustration in his stance. Without thinking, Sarah reached for her phone, the ancient flip model they kept for emergencies, ready to call if he needed help. But he was already straightening up, running a hand through his graying hair, carrying on as he always did. That was the thing about her dad. He never quit. Not when the bank threatened foreclosure 2 years ago. Not when the insurance company denied coverage for her new wheelchair modifications. Not when well-meaning neighbors suggested he consider other options for her care. His determination was like a force field around their little family, protecting them from a world that sometimes seemed determined to break them apart. Sarah turned back to her drawing, adding careful shading to the wildflowers. Maybe she couldn't help with the tractor, but she could create something beautiful for him too. See, when he came in, tired and sore, she could be strong in her own way, even if that strength looked different from what most people expected. After all, she was Jack Wheeler's daughter, and Wheelers didn't quit, even if their wheels were metaphorical for him and very literal for her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Jack guided his pickup down the dusty back road that connected his property to the Henderson farm. The welding job had taken longer than expected, but Tom had paid him in cash, enough to cover next week's physical therapy session for Sarah. The truck's ancient air conditioning wheezed weakly, and Jack had his window rolled down, letting the warm Tennessee air rush past. That's why he heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the usual chorus of cicadas and distant farm equipment. A cry, high and frightened, barely audible over the truck's engine. Jack slowed, listening intently. There it was again, coming from old Miller's abandoned field, where tall grass swayed in the breeze, obscuring whatever lay beyond. "Hello!" he called out, pulling onto the shoulder. "Anybody there? Help!" The voice was young, female, and terrified. "Please, somebody help!" Jack was out of the truck before he could even think about it, his boots crunching on gravel as he pushed through the tall grass. The voice called again, weaker this time, guiding him through the overgrown field. He found her in a small clearing, a young girl, maybe 13, slumped in a wheelchair that had gotten caught in the uneven ground. Her face was pale, sheened with sweat, and her left hand clutched her right ankle. "I'm Jack Wheeler," he said, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Snake," she managed, her voice tight with pain. "Copperhead, I think. I was trying to take a shortcut and—" She broke off, grimacing. "My chair got stuck and then—" Jack's heart raced as he knelt beside her. The bite was clearly visible. On her ankle, 2 distinct puncture marks surrounded by angry red swelling. How long had she been out here, in this heat with venom spreading? "I'm going to help you, okay?" He kept his voice calm, though his mind was racing through everything he knew about snake bites. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. Her skin was clammy when he touched her hand, her pulse rapid under his fingers. "Emma Bennett, I don't feel so good." "Stay with me, Emma." Jack glanced back toward his truck, calculating. The nearest clinic was in Cedar Grove, a good 20 minutes away, even pushing the speed limit. The hospital in Nashville would be better equipped, but it was twice that distance. They didn't have that kind of time. "I'm going to carry you to my truck," he explained, already reaching for her. "We need to get you to a doctor right away. Is it okay if I lift you?" She nodded weakly, and Jack scooped her up as gently as he could, trying not to jostle her injured leg. She was lighter than Sarah, but taller, and he had to adjust his grip carefully. The wheelchair was expensive, the kind of motorized model he'd looked at for Sarah before seeing the price tag, but there was no time to try to free it from the grass and mud. "My chair," Emma protested faintly as he started walking. "We'll come back for it," Jack promised. "Right now we need to get you help." The walk back to the truck seemed endless. Emma's head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing becoming more labored. Jack talked continuously, asking her questions, trying to keep her conscious and distracted from the pain. "Where are you?" "From Emma? Your parents must be worried." "Ran away," she mumbled. "From Nashville. Mom's always working." "Didn't think she'd notice." Jack's stomach clenched. A runaway, out here in the middle of nowhere. No wonder she'd tried cutting across the field. She was probably trying to avoid the main roads where someone might spot her. He got her settled in the passenger seat, reclined it slightly, and quickly grabbed the first aid kit from behind his seat. "Emma, stay awake for me." he ordered, wrapping her ankle loosely to help track the swelling. Keep talking. Tell me about your mom. She's important, always busy. After Dad died, Emma's words were becoming slurred. Just wanted her to notice. Jack cranked the engine and threw the truck into gear, gravel spraying as he pulled back onto the road. He fumbled for his ancient flip phone with one hand trying to get a signal. One bar, it would have to do. He dialed the clinic's number from memory, having called it often enough for Sarah. Cedar Grove Medical Clinic, a familiar voice answered. Jenny, it's Jack Wheeler. I'm bringing in a snakebite victim. Young girl, copperhead, maybe 30 minutes since the bite. Need anti-venom ready. How far out are you? Jack pressed the accelerator harder, the truck's engine protesting. 20 minutes, maybe 15. If the old girl holds together. We'll be ready. Keep her awake, Jack. He tossed the phone aside and reached over to shake Emma's shoulder gently. Her skin was cool and damp, her eyes fluttering. Hey, stay with me. Tell me more about Nashville. What's it like living in the big city? The old pickup truck rattled over every bump in the road, each jolt making Emma wince. Jack kept one hand on the wheel and the other ready to steady her when needed, his eyes constantly darting between the winding road and her increasingly pale face. The truck's speedometer was pushing past 60 on roads meant for 40, but he didn't have a choice. Tell me about your favorite place in Nashville, Jack prompted, noticing Emma's eyes starting to drift shut again. Come on, Emma. Stay with me here. The art museum, she mumbled, her words slurring slightly. They have a special program for kids like me, wheelchair accessible everything. She tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. Mom used to take me every Sunday before what? Jack pressed, taking a sharp turn that made the truck's ancient suspension groan. He knew he needed to keep her talking, keep her mind working against the venom's effects. Before she became CEO. Emma's head rolled against the seat. 2 years ago, after Dad, everything changed. She's always in meetings now, always too busy. The bitterness in her voice was familiar. Jack had heard similar tones from Sarah when she talked about missing her mother. He checked Emma's ankle again at a relatively straight stretch of road. The swelling had spread, and the skin around the bite was an angry red. My daughter Sarah's about your age, he said, trying to distract her. She uses a wheelchair too. She's an artist, loves to draw. Maybe you two could... He broke off as Emma suddenly lurched forward, retching. Jack swerved to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. He held her shoulders as she vomited, her whole body trembling. Not good. The venom was moving faster than he'd hoped. Sorry, she whispered when the heaving subsided. Your truck. Don't worry about that. Jack grabbed a water bottle from behind his seat, helped her rinse her mouth. Her skin was clammy, her pulse racing under his fingers when he checked it. Just 10 more minutes to the clinic. You can do this, Emma. He pulled back onto the road, pushing the truck even harder. The engine whined in protest as they climbed a steep hill, and Jack found himself murmuring encouragement to both Emma and the vehicle. Come on, old girl. Just a little further. Stay with me, both of you. Emma's head lolled against the window. Mum's probably not even noticed I'm gone yet. She has this big merger this week. Wouldn't want to be disturbed. Hey now, Jack said firmly, recognizing the dangerous mix of venom and emotional pain in her voice. Your mom loves you. Sometimes parents. Sometimes we get lost in trying to provide for our kids. Forget that what they really need is just us. Present and accounted for. He thought of his own struggles, the long hours away from Sarah doing odd jobs to pay for her care, but that doesn't mean we don't love them. You don't know my mom, Emma whispered, but there was a question in her voice, a desperate hope that Jack was right. The truck crested another hill, and Jack's heart lifted at the sight of Cedar Grove's water tower in the distance, almost there. Emma's breathing had become more labored, and her responses to his questions were getting slower, more confused. Tell me about your chair, he said, grasping for another topic. Looks like a nice one. Better than what we could afford for Sarah. Custom fitted, Emma managed. Mum's assistant ordered it. Mum didn't even see it first. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. Here was a girl whose mother could afford the best medical care, the best equipment, everything Sarah needed, and yet Emma was still hurting, still feeling unseen. The irony wasn't lost on him. The truck's brakes squealed as they finally pulled into Cedar Grove, the small clinic sign a welcome sight. Jack could see Jenny, the head nurse, already waiting outside with a wheelchair. He'd called her so many times for Sarah that she was practically family. "Almost there, Emma. Just hold on." He reached over to squeeze her hand, found it cold and limp. "Emma?" Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Jack's heart jumped into his throat as he screeched. Into the clinic's parking lot. Jenny was already running toward them, shouting for help. "Copperhead bite!" Jack called out as he lifted Emma's unconscious form from the truck. "She's been in and out for the last 20 minutes. Started vomiting about 10 minutes ago." Jenny's capable hands were already checking Emma's pulse as Jack carried her inside. "We've got the antivenom ready. Dr. Miller's waiting." She looked up at Jack, her eyes serious. "You got her here just in time." Jack stood in the doorway of the treatment room, watching as the medical team swarmed around Emma's still form. He'd done all he could. Now it was up to them, and up to whatever higher power might be listening to his silent, fervent prayers. The Cedar Grove Medical Clinic had seen better days. Paint peeled from its walls in places, and the linoleum floor was worn to a dull sheen from decades of worried footsteps. But what it lacked in appearance, it made up for in heart, something Jack had learned during his many visits with Sarah. Dr. Miller worked quickly, his weathered hands steady, as he administered the antivenom. "Good thing we still keep this on hand," he muttered, more to himself than to Jack, who hovered anxiously in the corner of the treatment room. "Most places this small don't bother anymore. Too expensive, they say." "Will she be okay?" Jack asked, watching Emma's chest rise and fall beneath a thin hospital blanket. They'd cut away her designer jeans to treat the bite, and the contrast between her expensive clothes and the clinic's modest surroundings seemed stark. "The antivenom should help, but she needs more specialized care than we can provide here." Dr. Miller's face was grave. "I've called for an emergency transfer to Nashville General. They have a better-equipped ICU, and she'll need monitoring for potential complications." Jenny appeared in the doorway, her face worried. "Jack, I've been trying to reach her mother. The number Emma had in her phone just goes to some corporate office. They won't even put me through without proper authorization." Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "She said something about her mother being a CEO involved in a big merger this week. Emma ran away, probably why she was out in Miller's field in the first place." "A runaway?" Jenny's expression softened as she looked at the unconscious girl. "Poor thing. I'll keep trying, but in the meantime, we need a guardian's consent for the transfer." "I found her. I brought her in," Jack said firmly. "That makes her my responsibility until we find her mother. Where do I sign?" Dr. Miller nodded approvingly, handing over a clipboard thick with forms. Jack signed where indicated, trying not to think about the potential liability he was taking on. Some things were more important than legal concerns. "The ambulance will be here in 15 minutes, Jenny informed them, checking Emma's vital signs again. "Her blood pressure's stabilizing at least." Jack glanced at his watch, thinking of Sarah. He'd need to call Mrs. Henderson from next door to check on her. As if reading his mind, Jenny touched his arm. "I already called Tom's wife. She's with Sarah now. Said not to worry." The simple kindness of it, the way this small community looked after its own, made Jack's throat tight. "Thanks, Jenny. I ought to call Sarah, let her know what's happening." He stepped into the hallway, flipping open his old phone. Sarah answered on the first ring. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson said there was an emergency. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Found a girl about your age who needed help. Snakebite. She's stable now, but they're transferring her to Nashville." He hesitated, then added, "She uses a wheelchair, too." "Really?" Sarah's interest was immediate. "What's her name? Where's she from?" "Her name's Emma. She's from Nashville, actually. Listen, honey, I need to stay with her until they find her mom. Mrs. Henderson will Stay, Sarah interrupted firmly. She shouldn't be alone. Mrs. Henderson's teaching me to make her famous peach cobbler, and she says I can stay for dinner. Jack smiled, grateful once again for his daughter's big heart. You're sure you'll be okay? Dad. Sarah's tone was patient. I'm not the one who got bit by a snake. Go be a hero. Just come home after. Promise. Love you, kiddo. Love you, too, Dad. He returned to the treatment room just as Emma was starting to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding their blue depths. Where? You're at Cedar Grove Medical Clinic, Jack said gently. You're going to be okay. There, transferring you to Nashville soon. Better equipment there. No. Emma tried to sit up, panic filling her face. No, I can't go back. Easy now, Jack soothed, placing a careful hand on her shoulder. You need proper medical care, and your mom. She needs to know you're safe. Emma subsided against the pillows, tears welling in her eyes. She won't care. She never does. You're wrong about that, Jack said quietly. No matter what's happened, she's still your mom. And trust me, she'll care. Victoria Bennett stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office, staring out at the Nashville skyline without really seeing it. Her phone buzzed again, probably another update about the merger, but for the first time in her career, she couldn't focus on business. Miss Bennett? Her assistant David appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. The security team just finished reviewing the house cameras. They show Emma leaving in her chair around 6 this morning, heading east on Hillsborough Pike. Victoria's hands clenched on the window frame. 6 this morning. It was now nearly 4 in the afternoon, 10 hours. Her daughter had been missing for 10 hours, and she hadn't even known. How did I not? She caught herself, straightened her spine. What else? The police have been notified, but since Emma's 13 and left voluntarily, they're classifying it as a voluntary runaway situation. They've got patrols looking, but... David hesitated. They said most runaways return home within 24 hours. Most runaways weren't in wheelchairs. Most runaways hadn't just lost their fathers, too. Years ago, most runaways' mothers hadn't been so consumed with work that they'd missed their own daughter's therapy appointment 3 days in a row. The merger documents lay abandoned on her desk, the deal she'd spent months orchestrating suddenly meaningless. She should have known something was wrong when Emma stopped coming to her office after school, should have recognized the signs when her daughter grew quieter, more withdrawn. But there had always been another meeting, another crisis, another reason to say, not now, sweetheart. David, cancel everything. The merger, the board meeting, all of it. Get the helicopter ready. She turned from the window, already reaching for her phone. And call Marcus. Tell him I need the jet on standby. The merger team is already in the building, David reminded her gently. They've flown in from... I don't care if they've flown in from Mars, Victoria snapped, then caught herself. I'm... Sorry, just handle it. Tell them there's been a family emergency, because there has been, hasn't there? My daughter's out there somewhere, alone, and I didn't even notice she was gone. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. Victoria nearly declined it out of habit, then remembered why she needed to keep the line open. Victoria. Bennett. Miss Bennett, this is Jenny Carter from Cedar Grove Medical Clinic. We have your daughter Emma here. Victoria's knees went weak. Is she all right? She's stable now. She was brought in with a snake bite, but we've administered antivenom and arranged transfer to Nashville General. Snake bite. The word came out as a whisper. Victoria gripped her desk for support. Where? How? A local farmer found her in a field about 20 minutes from here. Got her to us just in time. Mr. Wheeler's still with her. Wouldn't leave her side until we found you. Mr. Wheeler. A stranger had been there for her daughter when she hadn't been. Victoria swallowed hard against the guilt threatening to choke her. The helicopter, she said, her CEO voice taking over to mask her trembling. David, redirect it to Cedar Grove, and call Nashville General. I want their best team ready when she arrives. She turned back to the phone. I'm on my way. 20 minutes by air. Please tell her I'm coming. She was already moving, heels clicking against marble floors as she strode toward the elevator. Her mind raced with everything she needed to do, medical arrangements, postponements, explanations. But one thought kept pushing through. Emma had run away, had nearly died, and Victoria hadn't known. In the elevator, she found herself staring at her reflection in the polished doors. The woman who looked back was immaculately put together, designer suit, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. The face of Bennett Technologies' successful CEO, the woman who doubled the company's value since taking over after Richard's death. Richard, what would he say if he could see her now? He'd always been the one who remembered the small things, Emma's favorite songs, the names of her friends, the exact degree of tilt her wheelchair needed. Victoria had handled the big things, the best doctors, the finest equipment, the most exclusive schools. Somehow, she'd convinced herself that was enough. The elevator doors opened to the helipad level, and Victoria stepped out into the roar of rotor blades. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying her toward her daughter, she made a silent promise to Richard, to Emma, to herself. Things were going to change. She didn't know how yet, but they would, because somewhere between board meetings and merger negotiations, she'd lost sight of what mattered most, and she'd almost lost it forever. The sound of helicopter blades chopping through the air drew everyone. At Cedar Grove Medical Clinic to the windows, Jack stood in Emma's room, watching as the sleek black aircraft descended onto the clinic's rarely used helipad. Even at a distance, he could tell it wasn't a medical transport. Too expensive. Too corporate. "That'll be Mom," Emma said quietly from her bed. The anti-venom had helped. Some color had returned to her cheeks, though her voice still carried an edge of exhaustion. Probably had to cancel some important meetings. Before Jack could respond, the door burst open and Victoria Bennett swept in. She was exactly what Jack would have expected from a CEO mother. Designer suit, perfect hair, the kind of presence that filled a room. But the look on her face when she saw Emma was anything but corporate. "Emma," she breathed, all composure vanishing as she rushed to the bedside. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm here now. I'm here." Emma stiffened initially at her mother's embrace, then slowly relaxed into it. "How did you even notice I was gone?" The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She pulled back just enough to look at her daughter's face, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "David saw you were missing from the security footage, but I should have known sooner, should have been there this morning, should have been, and there's so many mornings." Jack moved quietly toward the door, feeling like an intruder on this private moment, but Victoria's head snapped up. "Are you Mr. Wheeler?" "Yes, ma'am, Jack Wheeler." He suddenly felt very aware of his dusty jeans and worn boots. "You saved my daughter's life." Victoria stood, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, genuine. "I don't know how to even begin to thank you." "Anyone would have done the same," Jack said, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gratitude. "No," Emma spoke up. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and waited. You carried me out of that field, kept me talking. The whole way here, stayed with me." Victoria's eyes widened. "You carried her." "But her wheelchair, still out in Miller's Field," Jack admitted. "I can go back for it once Emma's settled." "I'll have someone retrieve it," Victoria said quickly, already reaching for her phone. Then she paused, really looking at Jack for the first time. "The nurse mentioned you have a daughter, Sarah, she's 12. Also uses a wheelchair, cerebral palsy." Understanding flickered across Victoria's face. "That's why you knew how to help Emma, how to lift her without causing more pain." A commotion in the hallway interrupted them as the Nashville General Transport team arrived. Dr. Miller entered with them, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Bennett, we need to go over some paperwork before the transfer. And Mr. Wheeler, since you were the first responder, we need your statement for the medical record." The next 30 minutes were a blur of forms and signatures. Jack described finding Emma, the symptoms he'd observed, the timing of everything. Victoria handled her end of the paperwork with practiced efficiency, but he noticed she kept one hand on Emma's bed the entire time, as if afraid her daughter might disappear again if she broke contact completely. Finally, the transport team was ready to move Emma. As they prepared to transfer her to the stretcher, Victoria turned to Jack again. "Mr. Wheeler, Jack, please let me do something to thank you. If you need anything, any kind of assistance—" "That's not necessary, Miss Bennett." "Victoria," she corrected automatically. "And yes, it is necessary. You didn't just save Emma's life. You showed her kindness when she needed it most." She glanced at her daughter, then back to Jack. "At least, let me replace your truck's interior. Emma mentioned she was sick during the drive." Jack had to smile at that. "The old girl's seen worse, but thank you." Emma reached out and caught Jack's hand as they wheeled her past. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything you said. About moms and love and stuff. Maybe you were right." Victoria's sharp intake of breath suggested she'd heard, but before she could ask what Emma meant, Jenny appeared with one final form. By the time that was handled, the transport team was ready to move. "Jack," Victoria said as she turned to follow her daughter, Would you give me your phone number? In case we need to contact you about anything, and maybe," she hesitated, "maybe Emma could meet Sarah sometime, once she's recovered." Jack thought about Sarah's fascination with Emma's story, about the loneliness both girls carried. "I think they'd like that." He wrote his number on the back of one of Victoria's business cards, the paper so thick and fancy it barely took the ink from his cheap pen. As he watched the small procession move toward the helipad, Emma on the stretcher and Victoria holding her hand, he sent up another quiet prayer. This time not just for healing, but for reconciliation. Some snake bites, he reflected, led to more than just venom in the blood. Sometimes they were the wake-up call a family needed. Nashville General Hospital was a different world from Cedar Grove Clinic. Everything gleamed, the floors, the equipment, the efficient staff in crisp uniforms. Emma's private room overlooked the city skyline, though she seemed more interested. In the small photo, she'd convinced her mother to take of Jack's truck before they left the clinic. "It's funny," she said, studying the faded blue paint and rusty bumper. "When I was stuck in that field, I thought I'd die there. Then this beat-up truck shows up, and everything changed." Victoria looked up from her laptop where she'd been, sending emails postponing meetings for the next week. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." She hesitated, then closed the computer. "Emma, what Jack said to you about mums and love?" Emma fidgeted with her blanket. "He said sometimes parents get lost trying to provide for their kids, forget what they really need." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said it doesn't mean they don't love them." Victoria's throat tightened. She moved from the visitor's chair to perch on the edge of Emma's bed. "He's right. I've been so focused on running the company, on building the legacy your father left us, that I forgot about building memories with you." "I miss him," Emma said simply, "and after he died, I lost you too." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Oh, sweetheart." She reached for Emma's hand, relieved when her daughter didn't pull away. "I'm still here. I've just been hiding in meetings and mergers because it hurt less than facing how much we both lost." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Patterson, the hospital's top toxicologist, entered with a tablet in hand. "Good news. The anti-venom is working. Well, and there's no sign of complications. The local clinic did good work." "When can I go home?" Emma asked. "We'll keep you for 48 hours for observation, but if all goes well, you can leave after that, though you'll need to take it easy for a few weeks." The doctor glanced at Victoria. "And you'll need to schedule follow-up appointments with a regular physician." Victoria nodded, already making mental notes. Then she caught herself. This was exactly what Jack had meant, falling into planning mode instead of being present. She forced herself to set aside the logistics and focus on Emma. "What would you like to do when you get home?" she asked. "Maybe we could have a movie night like we used to. I'll make that caramel popcorn your father could never get quite right." Emma's eyes widened in surprise, then hope. "Really? You won't be too busy?" "Nothing is more important than this," Victoria said firmly. The merger team can wait. The board can wait. I've already cleared my schedule for the next week. The whole week. The whole week. And, Victoria took a deep breath, I was thinking, maybe we could invite Jack and Sarah over sometime to thank them properly. A real smile spread across Emma's face, the first Victoria had seen in longer than she cared to admit. Sarah's my age, and she's in a chair too. Maybe we could be friends? I'd like that. Victoria smoothed Emma's hair back from her forehead, remembering how Richard used to do the same thing. You know, your father always said that friends were the family we choose for ourselves. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, Dad would have liked Jack. He always said real heroes, who don't wear capes. No, Victoria agreed, thinking of the dusty farmer in his worn jeans who'd carried her daughter to safety. Sometimes they drive old blue trucks. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Nashville, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd actually stopped to watch a sunset. There would be consequences to clearing her schedule, deals that might fall through, shareholders who would complain. But sitting here, watching the sky change colors with her daughter, she couldn't bring herself to care. Some things she was finally learning were worth more than stock prices and merger deals. Some things couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Late that night, after Emma had finally drifted off to sleep, Victoria found herself drawn to the box of personal items the hospital staff had collected from her daughter's wheelchair. Among them was a worn leather wallet, Richard's wallet, which had gone missing shortly after his death. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, behind Richard's old driver's license, she found a carefully folded photograph. It showed the three of them at the art museum, taken just weeks before the accident. Richard was kneeling beside Emma's wheelchair, both of them laughing at something while Victoria looked on, her arm around her husband's shoulders. They looked so happy, so complete. I didn't know she had that. Victoria startled. Emma was awake, watching her from the hospital. Bed. I found it in his study, Emma continued softly, the day after it happened. You were so busy with the company takeover, and I needed something of his to keep close. Victoria moved to sit beside her daughter, the photograph trembling in her hands. I looked everywhere for this wallet. I thought it might have his last note in it. It does. Emma reached for the wallet, opened a hidden compartment Victoria had forgotten existed. Inside was a folded piece of paper, the creases worn soft with repeated handling. I've read it so many times I know it by heart. Victoria unfolded the note, recognizing Richard's distinctive handwriting. My dearest girls, if you're reading this, then my heart finally gave out for good. Don't waste time being angry at the doctors or the genetics that dealt me a bad hand. Instead, remember this. Every extra day I got with you both was a gift I didn't deserve, but treasured beyond measure. Emma, my brave girl, keep drawing, keep dreaming, keep proving the world wrong about what you can do. Your spirit shines brighter than any limitation, and never doubt that your mother loves you, even when she forgets to show it. She carries the weight of two parents now. Be patient with her. Victoria, my love, I know you'll try to be strong for everyone, to handle everything alone. Don't. Our daughter doesn't need a perfect mother. She needs you, present and real, with all your beautiful flaws. The company will survive without constant supervision. Emma's childhood won't love each other. Forgive each other. And remember that family isn't measured in minutes spent together, but in moments that matter. All my love. Richard. Victoria's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink that had already been softened by Emma's own tears over the past 2 years. Why didn't you show me this before? She whispered, Emma's fingers twisted in her blanket. At first I was angry. You disappeared into work right after the funeral, and I thought if you really wanted to know what Dad's last words were, you'd have looked harder for the wallet. She took a shaky breath. Then after a while it became like a secret connection to him, my private piece of Dad. And maybe I was scared that if I shared it, you'd just go back to work anyway. Oh, Emma. Victoria gathered her daughter into her arms, mindful of the IV lines. I'm so sorry. I convinced myself that throwing myself into the company was the best way to honor your father's legacy, to make sure you'd always be provided for. I didn't realize I was failing you both in the process. I know you love me, Emma said into her mother's shoulder. Jack was right about that. I miss you. Like I miss Dad. Except you're right. Here. Victoria pulled back just enough to look into her daughter's eyes. Richard's eyes, she realized with a pang. I'm here now, really here, and I promise you, things are going to change. The company can run without me being there 12 hours a day. Your father built an amazing team. It's time I trusted them to do their jobs while I do my most important job, being your mom. Emma's smile was watery but real. Dad would like that. Yes, Victoria agreed, looking again at the photograph of happier days. Yes, he would. Outside the hospital room, Nashville's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring challenges, physical therapy for Emma, restructuring at work for Victoria, the long process of rebuilding what they'd lost. But for now, in the quiet hours of night, mother and daughter held each other and remembered the man who'd loved them enough to leave them a roadmap back to each other. 3 days after Emma's release from the hospital, Victoria found herself driving down an unfamiliar country road, following Jack Wheeler's careful directions to his farm. Emma sat beside her in the passenger seat, nervously smoothing the skirt. She'd insisted on wearing to meet Sarah. What if she doesn't like me? Emma asked for the 3rd time. I mean, I'm just some city girl who was stupid enough to get bit by a snake. From what Jack's told me, Sarah's been talking about meeting you non-stop. Victoria slowed as they approached a rustic mailbox marked Wheeler Farm. Besides, you both love art. That's a good start. The gravel driveway led them to a modest farmhouse with a well-tended vegetable garden and a wheelchair ramp that had clearly been built with great care. Jack was waiting on the porch, and Victoria noticed he'd traded his usual work clothes for clean jeans and a pressed shirt. "Welcome to our place," he called as they pulled up. "Sarah's been watching from the window for the last hour." As if on cue, the screen door opened and Sarah Wheeler emerged, her wheelchair moving smoothly across the wooden ramp. Victoria was struck by the girl's bright smile and the way her eyes sparkled with intelligence and warmth. So like Emma's, despite their different circumstances. "You must be Emma," Sarah said, wheeling forward. "Dad told me all about you. Is it true you're taking art classes at the museum? What kind of techniques do they teach?" Emma's nervousness vanished in the face of Sarah's enthusiasm. Soon, the girls were deep in conversation about different drawing methods, their wheelchairs positioned side by side on the porch while Jack and Victoria stood back, watching their daughters connect. "Sarah's never had a friend who really understands," Jack said quietly. "The online support groups help, but it's not the same as someone in person," Victoria finished. She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about something, about ways I could maybe help, not just Sarah, but other families in similar situations." Jack turned to look at her, curious. "The Bennett Foundation currently focuses on technological innovation," Victoria explained. "But what if we created a new initiative? Something focused on accessibility, on connecting families, on providing resources that insurance doesn't cover. That's quite an undertaking. I have the resources. What I need is someone who understands the real challenges these families face. Someone who knows the community, who can help identify what people actually need rather than what corporate types think they need." She met his eyes. "Someone like you, Jack." He blinked, surprised. "Me, as an advisor to start. Help us understand where the gaps are. What would make the biggest difference? We could begin right here in Tennessee, then expand as we learn what works." Before Jack could respond, delighted laughter drew their attention back to the girls. Sarah was showing Emma her art journal, pointing out a detailed sketch of the old barn behind the house. "Dad," Sarah called, "can Emma stay for lunch? She's never had homemade biscuits before. Jack glanced at Victoria, who nodded. I think that could be arranged. In fact, she pulled out her phone, opened her calendar, and deliberately cleared the afternoon's appointments. Why don't we all stay for lunch, if that's not imposing? Wouldn't be the first time I've stretched 4 portions to feed 6, Jack said with a smile. Though you might have to put up with my cooking. I'd like that. Victoria slipped her phone back into her purse, ignoring the emails she could feel accumulating. And maybe while the girls get to know each other, we could talk more about that. Foundation idea? Maybe we could, Jack agreed. He looked at their daughters, now bent together over Sarah's sketchbook, already deep in their own world. You know, sometimes the best bridges are built by accident. Victoria thought of a dusty field, a snakebite, and a battered blue truck that had changed everything. Yes, she said softly. Yes, they are. As they headed inside, Victoria caught a glimpse of something she hadn't noticed before. A painting hanging in the farmhouse entryway, clearly done by Sarah. It showed 2 wheelchair tracks running side by side through a field of wildflowers, leading toward a bright horizon. Sometimes, Victoria reflected, the universe had its own way of bringing people together. And sometimes it took a crisis to help you see the gifts hidden in unexpected places. A week later, Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at the papers Victoria had left behind after their latest visit. The trust fund document was printed on expensive paper, the kind that felt foreign in his calloused hands. The numbers on it made his head spin. "Dad!" Sarah wheeled into the kitchen, immediately noticing his expression. "Is everything okay? Ms. Bennett left some papers for us to look at." He rubbed his face, trying to find the right words. "She wants to set up a trust fund for your education and medical care. And," he gestured helplessly at the document, "pretty much everything else." Sarah wheeled closer, looking at the papers upside down. "Is that bad?" "No, sweetheart. It's incredibly generous. It's just," Jack struggled to articulate his feelings, "I've always been the one taking care of us. Since your mom died, it's been my job to figure things out, to make ends meet. But you always tell me it's okay to accept help when we need it," Sarah pointed out. "Like when Mrs. Henderson brings casseroles, or when Tom lets you use his tractor." Jack smiled despite himself. Trust his daughter to use his own lessons against him. "This is a little bigger than a casserole, honey. Is it because of Emma? Because I helped her with her art project?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Last time they visited, Emma was struggling with her perspective drawing. I showed her that trick Mom taught me about imagining the horizon line first." Sarah's eyes took on that distant look they sometimes got when she talked about Margaret. "And Miss Bennett, she got all quiet watching us. Then she started asking about my art classes and if I'd ever had proper training." Jack remembered that conversation. Victoria had been shocked to learn that Sarah's artistic talent was largely self-taught, developed through online tutorials and borrowed library books. The trust fund proposal had arrived 2 days later. "Ms. Bennett says she wants to honor what you did for Emma," Sarah continued, "but I think maybe she just understands now about how some things are more important than money, but sometimes you need money to make those important things happen." When had his little girl gotten so wise? Jack reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You sound like your mother. Mom would want us to accept help if it meant I could take real art classes, or try that new physical therapy program Dr. Miller mentioned." Sarah's voice grew softer. "And maybe helping us helps Ms. Bennett too. Emma says she's different, now more present, like she remembered how to be a mom instead of just a CEO." The wisdom in Sarah's words struck deep. Jack looked again at the trust fund document, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't charity. It was one parent reaching out to another, trying to build something better for both their daughters. "There's something else," he admitted. "Miss Bennett wants me to help run a new foundation, helping families like ours all across Tennessee, making sure other kids get the opportunities you and Emma should have had all along." Sarah's face lit up. "Dad, that's perfect. You always know exactly what people need, even when they don't know themselves. Like with Emma in that field." Jack thought about all the families he knew struggling with similar challenges. The Hendersons' grandson, who needed a wheelchair they couldn't afford. Tom's niece, who had to drop out of physical therapy when the insurance ran out. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe accepting help didn't mean giving up his role as provider. Maybe it meant expanding that role to help more families than just his own. What do you think, sweetheart? Should we take Ms. Bennett up on her offer? Sarah's smile was all the answer he needed. I think Mom would say we'd be foolish not to, and Mom was never foolish. Jack looked at his daughter, his brave, wise, talented daughter, and made his decision. Sometimes being a good parent meant knowing when to set pride aside. Sometimes it meant accepting help so you could help others in turn. Well then, he said, reaching for a pen, I guess we'd better start planning your first real art class. The morning of Sarah's first appointment at the Nashville Rehabilitation Center dawned clear and bright. Jack watched his daughter practically vibrating with excitement as they pulled into the gleaming facility's parking lot, her art supplies clutched in her lap. After her evaluation here, she had her first private art lesson scheduled at the museum's accessible studio, the same program Emma attended. Look, Dad! Sarah pointed as they approached the entrance. They have automatic doors like the ones Emma told me about. Jack smiled, but his attention was caught by the sign near the door. Nashville Rehabilitation Center, a Bennett Foundation partner facility. It had been Victoria's first decision after he'd agreed to help with the foundation, ensuring the center would accept any patient regardless of their ability to pay. Inside, they found Emma and Victoria already waiting. The girls immediately launched into an animated discussion about the art class they'd be taking together, while Victoria handed Jack a thick folder. The preliminary proposals from other rehabilitation centers across the state, she explained. They're interested in partnering with the foundation, but I wanted your opinion before we proceed. Jack thumbed through the documents, noting familiar towns, recognizing the names of facilities he'd once considered for Sarah before cost made them impossible. How many families could we help? To start, at least 50. More as we expand. Victoria's eyes followed their daughter's as a physical therapist approached to escort Sarah to her evaluation. But it's not just about the numbers. It's about changing the whole approach. These families need more than just medical care. They need community, connection, opportunities. Jack thought about Sarah's face lighting up when she talked about her online art classes, about Emma's newfound confidence since she'd started spending time at the farm. Connection matters as much as care, he agreed. Mr. Wheeler? A new voice interrupted them. Dr. Patricia Chen, the center's director, approached with a tablet in hand. I've been reviewing Sarah's records from Cedar Grove. I think we can do a lot for her here. She hesitated, glancing at Victoria. Though some of the treatments I'd recommend aren't typically covered by standard insurance. That's not a concern, Victoria said firmly. The foundation will ensure Sarah gets whatever care she needs. Jack started to protest out of habit, but caught himself. This wasn't charity. This was partnership. He and Victoria had spent hours discussing how the foundation would work, how it would help families like his maintain their dignity while accessing life-changing care. Dr. Chen's face brightened. In that case, I'd like to start her on our new robotics-assisted therapy program. And there's an aquatic therapy course that could significantly improve her muscle strength. With your permission, of course. Jack thought about all the times he'd had to say no to treatments that might have helped. All the nights he'd lain awake, wondering if he was failing Sarah by not being able to afford more. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes to all of it. Victoria touched his arm gently. This is just the beginning, Jack. What we learn from Sarah's care will help us create a model for other families. Your experience, your understanding of what families really need, it's invaluable. Through the observation window, they could see Sarah working with the physical therapist, her face bright with determination as she tried a new exercise. Emma had wheeled herself close to the window, cheering her friend on. You know, Jack said slowly, when Margaret first got sick, She made me promise to make sure Sarah had every opportunity to thrive. I thought that meant doing everything myself, and proving I could be both mother and father. He watched his daughter accomplish the movement she'd been attempting, saw her triumphant smile. But maybe this is what Margaret meant, learning to accept help so Sarah could truly soar. Richard would have loved this, Victoria added softly. The foundation, the girls' friendship, all of it. He always said business should be about more than just profit. Dr. Chen returned with a proposed treatment schedule, and as Jack reviewed it with her, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time since Margaret's death, he didn't feel alone in caring for Sarah. He had partners now, not just Victoria and the foundation, but an entire community of support. Sometimes the hardest decisions weren't about what to do, but about learning to accept what was being offered. Sometimes strength meant knowing when to share the load. The conference room at Bennett Technologies buzzed with anticipation. Local media had gathered for the official announcement of the Wheeler-Bennett Accessibility Foundation, and Jack found himself fidgeting with his tie, a gift from Victoria for the occasion. Sarah and Emma sat together near the podium. There, wheelchairs positioned side by side, matching proud grins on their faces. "Nervous?" Victoria asked, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She'd forgone her usual power suit for a more approachable blazer and slacks, another subtle sign of how things had changed. "Terrified," Jack admitted, accepting the coffee. "Public speaking isn't exactly a skill you develop on the farm. Just speak from the heart. That's what this foundation is about. Real people, real needs, real solutions." She smiled as Emma wheeled over to adjust his tie with practiced hands. "Besides, you've already done the hard part." She was right. The past month had been a whirlwind of meetings with healthcare providers, accessibility experts, and families across Tennessee. Jack had shared his experiences, listened to countless similar stories, and helped shape the foundation's priorities. The result was a comprehensive program that went beyond just medical care. It included education support, adaptive equipment, family counseling, and perhaps most importantly, community building. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria's assistant David announced, "please welcome Miss Victoria Bennett and Mr. Jack Wheeler." As they approached the podium together, Jack caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Tom Henderson and his wife sat near the back, beside the parents of 3 other children with disabilities from Cedar Grove. Jenny from the clinic was there too, beaming with pride. This wasn't just a corporate announcement, it was a community coming together. Victoria spoke first, her voice clear and confident. "2 months ago, a chance encounter changed not just 2 families, but showed us a way to change thousands more. When Jack Wheeler found my daughter Emma in that field, he didn't just save her life. He opened our eyes to the challenges and opportunities we'd been missing." She gestured to Jack, who stepped forward, his hands steady on the podium as he looked out at the crowd. "I spent years thinking I had to handle everything alone," he began, "that being strong meant never asking for help. But true strength comes from community, from reaching out to others and letting them reach back." The words came easier than he'd expected, flowing from years of experience and hope. He talked about Sarah's progress in her new therapy programs, about the families he'd met who just needed a chance, about the way Emma and Sarah had shown them all the power of connection. "This foundation isn't about charity," he concluded. "It's about partnership, about recognizing that every family deserves access to the care and opportunities that can help their children thrive, about building bridges between communities that never knew they needed each other." As applause filled the room, Sarah and Emma rolled forward, carrying the foundation's new logo, a simple design showing 2 wheelchair tracks forming a bridge. It had been Sarah's idea, inspired by one of her drawings, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Afterwards, as reporters gathered around Victoria for additional comments, Jack found himself surrounded by parents eager to share their stories and learn about the foundation's programs. One mother, tears in her eyes, showed him pictures of her son who needed specialized equipment they couldn't afford. Jack took down her information, knowing that by next week that equipment would be ordered. "Dad!" Sarah called from across the room. "Emma's mom says we can all go get ice cream to celebrate. Can we?" Jack looked at his daughter, his confident, blooming daughter who now had not just art classes and proper medical care, but a best friend who truly understood her world. Ice cream sounds perfect. As they headed out, Victoria fell into step beside him. "You know, when I first offered to help your family, I thought I was the one giving something. I never imagined how much we'd receive in return." Through the lobby windows, they could see news vans setting up for evening broadcasts. By tonight, other families across Tennessee would learn about the foundation, would realize they weren't alone. Change was coming, one connection at a time. "Speaking of receiving," Jack said, remembering something, "Sarah wants to show you her latest painting. She did it in her new art class." "The one of the snake in the field?" Emma chimed in. "Mom, you're going to love it." She made the snake look almost beautiful, and the sunlight coming through the grass is amazing. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "A snake?" "Sometimes," Sarah said with wisdom beyond her years. "The scariest things can lead to the most beautiful changes." Looking at their daughters heading toward the elevator, chattering about art and ice cream flavors, Jack couldn't help but agree. Sometimes the most profound new beginnings came disguised as endings. Sometimes it took a crisis to build a miracle. Not everything changed overnight. 3 months after the foundation's launch, Jack found himself sitting in Victoria's elegant office, struggling to explain why their latest initiative wasn't working as planned. "The families in Mountain View don't want to participate," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "They're proud folks. They see the foundation's name, think it's just another big city program that doesn't understand their needs." Victoria frowned at the local newspaper article on her desk, which painted the foundation's efforts as patronizing. "But we're offering exactly what they told us they needed: equipment, therapy services, educational support. It's not about what we're offering. It's about how we're offering it." Jack stood, pacing the office. "These are people like me, Victoria, people who've handled everything themselves for so long that accepting help feels like failure." Across the building, in the foundation's new accessible art studio, Emma and Sarah were facing their own challenges. Sarah's art teacher had encouraged her to enter a prestigious competition, but Emma's casual mention of her private lessons years ago had created an unexpected tension. "I just don't want anyone thinking I got special treatment," Sarah explained, staring at her half-finished competition piece. "Some of the other kids at the community center were talking about how I only got into the advanced class because of the foundation." Emma wheeled closer to her friend's easel, studying the painting. "You got in because you're talented. Look at this light technique. I still can't get mine to look that natural." "Easy for you to say. You've had years of proper training." "And what good did it do me?" Emma's voice carried an edge of bitterness. "I had all the advantages, but I was so lonely I ran away, ended up nearly dying in a field. Sometimes having everything handed to you isn't the answer." A knock at the studio door interrupted them. It was Jack, with Victoria right behind him. Both girls recognized their parents' concerned expressions. "We couldn't help overhearing," Victoria said softly, "and I think maybe we all need to have an honest conversation." They gathered in the studio's sitting area, where the girls had spent countless hours drawing and talking over the past months. Jack noticed how the space had evolved, Sarah's influence visible in the carefully organized supplies, Emma's in the modern easels and adaptive tools. "The foundation's hitting some growing pains," he explained, "and maybe they're connected to what you two are feeling." Victoria nodded. "We've been so focused on providing resources that maybe we've overlooked something more important. Dignity. The right to feel like you've earned what you receive. Like the Mountain View families," Jack added. "They don't want a handout. They want a hand up, a chance to be part of the solution, not just recipients of it." Sarah wheeled forward slightly. "That's how I feel about the art competition. I want to know I got in because of my work, not because of connections." And I want people to see me as more than just the rich girl who got rescued, Emma added. I want to contribute something meaningful. Victoria and Jack exchanged looks. In their determination to fix everything, they'd nearly missed the deeper lesson their daughters were teaching them. What if, Victoria said slowly, we restructured the Mountain View program? Instead of the foundation coming in with solutions, we asked the community to help design them, make them partners rather than recipients. And the art program, Jack added, looking at Sarah. Maybe we need a student advisory board to help shape it. Who better to understand what young artists need than young artists themselves? Emma's face lit up. Sarah and I could help with that. We already know lots of kids from the community center who have great ideas. And maybe, Sarah said, her confidence returning, my competition piece could be about this, about how different communities can work together without anyone losing their sense of self. Victoria stood, moving to look out the studio's windows at the city beyond. When I started this foundation, I thought it was about providing resources, but it's really about building bridges, and bridges need to be strong on both sides. Jack joined her at the window. These growing pains, maybe they're actually growing strengths, teaching us all how to do this right. Behind them, the girls had already turned back to Sarah's easel, discussing how to adapt her competition piece to reflect their new understanding. Their voices were animated, filled with plans and possibilities. You know what this means, Victoria said quietly to Jack. More community meetings, more listening sessions, more time. Jack smiled, watching their daughters work together. Good thing we've got some excellent teachers right here. Sometimes the hardest lessons were the most valuable. And sometimes growth meant learning to step back and let others show you the way forward. The Mountain View Community Center hadn't seen this much activity in years. Folding chairs filled the main room, occupied by families from across the region. At the front, a simple table held Jack, Victoria, and, most importantly, 3 local parents who had agreed to co-chair the Foundation's new Community Advisory Board. Welcome, everyone. Mary Sanderson, one of the co-chairs, addressed the crowd. Her son, Tyler, sat beside her in his wheelchair, beaming with pride as his mother spoke. We're here today not just to receive help, but to help shape how that help is given. Jack watched the faces in the audience soften. Mary wasn't a corporate executive or a city consultant. She was one of them, a mother who'd fought the same battles they had. When she spoke about needs and challenges, every head nodded in recognition. Victoria stood next, but instead of moving to the podium, she stayed at the table. The Wheeler Bennett Foundation isn't here to tell you what you need. We're here to listen, to learn, and to work together to create solutions that truly serve this community. In the back of the room, Emma and Sarah sat with a group of local kids, their heads bent over notebooks. They'd been appointed to lead the Youth Advisory Committee, gathering input from young people about what they wanted from the Foundation's programs. Remember last month, Sarah whispered to Emma, when you said maybe we should have adaptive sports programs? Look how many kids here wrote that down too. Emma nodded, adding another note to their growing list. Since the Foundation had shifted to this community-driven approach, ideas had flowed freely. People who'd initially resisted charity were now eagerly sharing their experiences and suggestions. The meeting continued, with local parents standing to share their stories. Each one added depth to the Foundation's understanding of rural challenges, the long drives to therapy appointments, the isolation, the need for more than just medical support. My Jimmy loves baseball, one father said, his voice rough with emotion. But the nearest adaptive sports program is 2 hours away. If we had something local, we could use the old Miller Field, another parent suggested. Fix it up proper. Make it accessible. My husband's a contractor. We could help with the work. The energy in the room shifted as people began offering what they could contribute. A retired physical therapist volunteered to help train local volunteers. A high school coach proposed starting an inclusive sports league. Parents discussed carpooling arrangements and equipment sharing. Victoria caught Jack's eye across the table, both of them thinking the same thing. This was what they'd hoped for, but hadn't known how to achieve true community ownership. During the break, Sarah and Emma presented their youth committee's findings. Their confidence had grown over the months, and they spoke with authority about the needs they'd identified. "It's not just about medical stuff," Sarah explained. "Kids, like us, need places to belong, things to look forward to. That's why we're proposing a monthly arts and sports festival, where everyone can participate in their own way. And we want to start a mentoring program," Emma added, "connecting kids who've been through similar challenges, because sometimes the best help comes from someone who really understands." The proposals were met with enthusiastic approval, particularly from the younger attendees who'd never been asked for their input before. As the meeting wound down, Mary stood again. "The Foundation's offering us resources, yes, but they're also offering us respect. The chance to build something that truly belongs to our community. That's worth more than any amount of money." Afterward, as people lingered to chat and share ideas, Jack found himself standing with Victoria near the refreshment table. "Look at that," he said, nodding toward where Sarah and Emma sat surrounded by local kids, all talking animatedly about their plans for the sports festival. "Remember when we thought we had to figure everything out ourselves?" Victoria smiled, watching Emma gesture enthusiastically as she described her vision for an accessible art corner at the festival. "We just needed to get out of our own way. Let the community show us how to build something better than we could have imagined." Through the center's windows, they could see the sun setting over Mountain View, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The same mountains that had once seemed to isolate this community were now backdrop to its renaissance. "You know what this means," Jack said, echoing Victoria's words from months ago. "More meetings, more planning, more time." "Yes," Victoria agreed, watching their daughters lead their young committee in a closing discussion. "But this time we're not doing it alone. None of us are. Sometimes the strongest communities were built not from the top down, but from the inside out. And sometimes the best leaders were those who knew when to step back and let others lead the way." 1 year to the day after the snakebite that changed everything, Jack stood in Old Miller's Field, watching as volunteers transformed the once neglected space. Where Emma had once lain injured, a paved pathway now wound through carefully maintained wildflowers. The Foundation's first fully accessible community park was taking shape. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Victoria said, joining him. She traded her usual business attire for jeans and a work shirt, ready to help with the day's planting. "Though I still get nervous every time I see a snake warning sign." "That was Sarah's idea," Jack reminded her. "Said we shouldn't hide. The dangers, just make sure everyone knows how to be safe." He gestured toward where Sarah and Emma were leading an orientation session for young visitors, teaching them about local wildlife and emergency procedures. The girls had grown remarkably over the past year. Sarah's art had flourished under proper instruction, and she was now teaching beginners' classes at the community center. Emma had discovered a talent for organization and advocacy, becoming the voice of young people in foundation meetings. "Mr. Wheeler," a familiar voice called out. Jenny from Cedar Grove Clinic approached, followed by Dr. Miller. The clinic had become one of the Foundation's first success stories, receiving funding for updated equipment and expanded services. "The new emergency response protocols you and the girls developed are working beautifully," Jenny reported. "3 families have already used the emergency alert system this summer. No snake bites, thankfully, but knowing help is available makes such a difference." Dr. Miller nodded in agreement. "And the mobile clinic program, it's revolutionizing rural healthcare access. We've reached families who haven't seen a doctor in years." Victoria smiled, remembering the contentious early meetings where they'd struggled to find the right approach. "It works, because the community made it their own. We just provided the tools." Across the field, Tom Henderson was teaching a group of parents how to maintain the accessible playground equipment they'd helped install. His grandson, finally able to join in play thanks to his new wheelchair, led other children in an elaborate game of their own invention. "Victoria!" Mary Sanderson called from the community center's new wing. "The art gallery is ready for setup whenever Sarah and Emma finish their session." The gallery had been Sarah's idea, a space to showcase artwork by young people with disabilities. A snakebite painting, which had won first place in the state competition, would be the centerpiece of their inaugural exhibition. "Speaking of the exhibition," Victoria said to Jack, "have you decided what you're wearing to the opening?" Jack groaned good-naturedly. "You mean the suit you and Emma picked out isn't enough? Now I need to decide things?" "Dad's nervous about his speech," Sarah confided, wheeling up with Emma beside her. "But he shouldn't be. Everyone wants to hear how it all started." Emma nodded. "Mom was nervous about her first community meeting too, remember? Now look at her. She hasn't checked her phone for business calls all day." Victoria laughed, pulling her daughter into a quick hug. "Because I finally learned what matters most. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us the way home." The afternoon sun gilded the scene as more families arrived for the park's pre-opening celebration. Children of all abilities played together. On the accessible equipment, parents shared resources and stories, and the sense of isolation that had once defined rural disability care seemed to fade with each new connection made. "You know what I think about sometimes," Emma said, watching a young girl in a wheelchair being pushed by her father along the smooth new paths. "If I hadn't run away that day, if I hadn't ended up in this field, then we would have found another way to come together," Sarah finished firmly. "Maybe not as dramatically, but it would have happened somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Jack watched their daughters head off to help with the gallery setup, remembering all the bad nights he'd stayed awake worrying about Sarah's future. Now she had not just proper medical care and education, but a whole community of support, a best friend who truly understood her, and opportunities he'd never dreamed possible. "Sarah's right," he said to Victoria. "Some things are meant to be, though I could have done with fewer snakes in the equation." Victoria laughed, then grew serious. Richard would have loved this. He always said business should be about making life better for people. Margaret too, Jack agreed. She believed art could bring people together, heal wounds, build bridges. Together, they watched the sun begin to set over their transformed field, where wheeler tracks now meant progress and hope, rather than crisis and fear. Sometimes the best endings were really just better beginnings in disguise. 1 year to the day after the snakebite that changed everything, Jack stood in Old Miller's Field, watching as volunteers transformed the once neglected space. Where Emma had once lain injured, a paved pathway now wound through carefully maintained wildflowers. The Foundation's first fully accessible community park was taking shape. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Victoria said, joining him. She'd traded her usual business attire for jeans and a work shirt, ready to help with the day's planting. "Though I still get nervous every time I see a snake warning sign." "That was Sarah's idea," Jack reminded her. "Said we shouldn't hide. The dangers, just make sure everyone knows how to be safe." He gestured toward where Sarah and Emma were leading an orientation session for young visitors, teaching them about local wildlife and emergency procedures. The girls had grown remarkably over the past year. Sarah's art had flourished under proper instruction, and she was now teaching beginners classes at the community center. Emma had discovered a talent for organization and advocacy, becoming the voice of young people in foundation meetings. "Mr. Wheeler," a familiar voice called out. Jenny from Cedar Grove Clinic approached, followed by Dr. Miller. The clinic had become one of the Foundation's first success stories, receiving funding for updated equipment and expanded services. "The new emergency response protocols you and the girls developed are working beautifully," Jenny reported. 3 families have already used the emergency alert system this summer. No snake bites, thankfully, but knowing help is available makes such a difference. Dr. Miller nodded in agreement. "And the mobile clinic program?" It's revolutionizing rural healthcare access. We've reached families who haven't seen a doctor in years. Victoria smiled, remembering the contentious early meetings where they'd struggled to find the right approach. It works because the community made it their own. We just provided the tools. Across the field, Tom Henderson was teaching a group of parents how to maintain the accessible playground equipment they'd helped install. His grandson, finally able to join in play thanks to his new wheelchair, led other children in an elaborate game of their own invention. "Victoria!" Mary Sanderson called from the community center's new wing. "The art gallery is ready for setup whenever Sarah and Emma finish their session." The gallery had been Sarah's idea, a space to showcase artwork by young people with disabilities. Her snakebite painting, which had won first place in the state competition, would be the centerpiece of their inaugural exhibition. "Speaking of the exhibition," Victoria said to Jack, "have you decided what you're wearing to the opening?" Jack groaned good-naturedly. "You mean the suit you and Emma picked out isn't enough? Now I need to decide things." "Dad's nervous about his speech," Sarah confided, wheeling up with Emma beside her. "But he shouldn't be. Everyone wants to hear how it all started." Emma nodded. "Mom was nervous about her first community meeting too, remember? Now look at her. She hasn't checked her phone for business calls all day." Victoria laughed, pulling her daughter into a quick hug. "Because I finally learned what matters most. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us the way home." The afternoon sun gilded the scene as more families arrived for the park's pre-opening celebration. Children of all abilities played together. On the accessible equipment, parents shared resources and stories, and the sense of isolation that had once defined rural disability care seemed to fade with each new connection made. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Emma said, watching a young girl in a wheelchair being pushed by her father along the smooth new paths. "If I hadn't run away that day, if I hadn't ended up in this field, then we would have found another way to come together," Sarah finished firmly. "Maybe not as dramatically, but it would have happened somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Jack watched their daughters head off to help with the gallery setup, remembering all the nights he'd stayed awake worrying about Sarah's future. Now she had not just proper medical care and education, but a whole community of support, a best friend who truly understood her, and opportunities he'd never dreamed possible. "Sarah's right," he said to Victoria. "Some things are meant to be, though I could have done with fewer snakes in the equation." Victoria laughed, then grew serious. "Richard would have loved this. He always said business should be about making life better for people." "Margaret too," Jack agreed. "She believed art could bring people together, heal wounds, build bridges." Together, they watched the sun begin to set over their transformed field, where wheeler tracks now meant progress and hope rather than crisis and fear. Sometimes the best endings were really just better beginnings in disguise.